Okay, so if you've ever felt really sad and tired all the time, you've probably found yourself trapped in this cycle of feeling bad for yourself, and so you don't end up doing anything healthy or productive, which makes you feel even worse about yourself, and you end up getting stuck in this sort of negative spiral, and then it becomes very difficult to get out. Now, I recently interviewed a neuroscientist about how the key to unlocking all of this stuff is the chemical serotonin.
So you'll notice that if you get some really good sleep, or you spend some time walking out in the sunshine, or you eat a big plate of fruit, for example, a mood elevation will actually occur. And that's our brain simply trying to reinforce the natural way of being as a human. And that's why it's effectively affecting our emotional balance. If, on the other side, you do eat some really unhealthy food, you spend all your day inside, you don't sleep very well, your mood will dip. And effectively, your mood is a really clever communication pathway between your brain and body, guiding us to engage in a more healthy way of being.
This is TJ Power, a neuroscientist who runs the Dose Lab, which specializes in understanding the 4 main brain chemicals that influence our day-to-day lives: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And very excitingly, we are exploring each one of these in a 4-part video series, and so today we are going to be looking at serotonin, how it influences our mood, and 5 simple habits, simple things we can do to improve our mood, so that hopefully we never find ourselves stuck in a rut or burnt out with low mood and energy levels. Part 1, the second brain. So we all obviously have these incredibly complex brains that control pretty much everything we do and how we feel and what we say and who we kind of are as people. But you might have heard yourself say things like, I've got butterflies in my stomach, or I need to trust my gut, or I'm shitting myself if you're really scared. Now, on one level, these are just phrases that we throw around in conversation, but from a scientific perspective, they actually do hold a lot of truth. And that is because our gut is also known as the second brain. This is not the productivity bro type second brain. This is like the science bro second brain. There are more than 100 million nerve cells in our gut, and our brain and gut communicate with each other all the time through what's called the gut-brain axis. And the hormone serotonin has a really big influence on their communication.
This is the chemical responsible for our mood and our energy. And the most important thing to understand about this chemical is 90% of it is being made in our gut. Our brain and body is constantly assessing how healthy our body actually is. And if the body is in a good state, if it's well rested, if it's got sunlight, if it's got loads of good nutrient-dense foods in, it leads to an increase in serotonin in the gut, which then improves how we feel in our mind.
And then on the flip side, if our serotonin levels decrease, then our mood and energy levels will be pretty low as well. Now, there are 2 main reasons why this is the case. The first thing is because of your vagus nerve. And this is the part of the nervous system that connects our brain to a bunch of other important organs in the body, including the heart and the stomach and the intestines of the gut. And crucially, serotonin influences the signals that are sent from the gut to the brain through the vagus nerve. So if our gut makes less serotonin, then there's going to be a change in the signals sent along the vagus nerve, and ultimately that will result in changes to our brain. So the chemical serotonin influences communication of the vagus nerve. And then the second thing to understand about serotonin before we get into the practical tips is that serotonin is made from an amino acid called tryptophan, and tryptophan from our diets travels into the brain, where then the brain converts it into serotonin. And so if we are not getting enough tryptophan through our diet, then we won't be able to make enough serotonin in the brain. So the key takeaway here is to remember that if we want to improve our mood and feel more energized and just generally feel better overall, we need to think about how we can support both our brain and our gut in making more serotonin. And if you do things to boost your serotonin levels, then you're going to feel happier and more energized, which will then reinforce those healthy behaviors to keep our serotonin levels high. So let's now look at 5 actionable and evidence-based ways to boost our serotonin, starting with the law of serotonin.
Interestingly, the law of serotonin is to make sure you walk headphone-free in nature every day. And that actually goes on to have an impact on all aspects of serotonin, which covers things like our nutrition, our sleep, quantity of sunlight, even down to how our body breathes. Effectively, with serotonin, the whole thing is about getting our system more aligned to nature and how it originally spent its time.
So in Japan, they've got this practice called Shinrin-yoku, which literally means forest bathing, which is basically where you spend some time in a forest walking around and looking at what is around you. And a researcher actually ran an A/B test on students to actually test, does this forest thing actually work? Is it legit? So they took a bunch of university students and they had them spend 1 day in a forest doing Shinrin-yoku, and then a second day doing the exact same thing, like walking around and looking around, but in a big city rather than in a forest. And the results of this study were actually really impressive. They wrote that forest environments promote lower concentrations of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, lower pulse rate, lower blood pressure, greater parasympathetic nerve activity, and lower sympathetic nerve activity than do city environments. Now, as you might know, the parasympathetic nerve is that branch of the nervous system that causes us to feel chill and relaxed. So more activity in the parasympathetic system and less activity in the sympathetic system, which is our sort of fight and flight kind of like wired kind of nervous system, that essentially promotes the feeling of relaxation and reduces our stress levels.
We as a species are only at home when we're in nature. That is humans' original home. We spent 300,000 years nowhere else. That's all there was to spend our time in: forests, beaches, mountains, whatever it may be. I actually believe this is the most important thing in all of this dose theory, is spending time in natural environments. The reason I believe that is humans are extremely misaligned to our former hunter-gatherer self, and the more you can become a hunter-gatherer in the modern world, the more you're going to thrive from a productivity point of view, from a relationship point of view, health, mood, energy, whatever it may be.
So really the goal here is to make sure that ideally we are spending some time in nature every single day, even if that means cycling or walking to a local park if you live in a big city here like I do. Now, while we're there in these green spaces, we want to be ideally trying to activate all of our senses, and so we want to be a little bit mindful about what we hear and see and smell and feel. And there is some interesting evidence that walking barefoot on grass is great too, because it has what people call a grounding effect. Now, more research on this topic definitely needs to be done, but the basic idea is that we as humans have a slightly positive electric charge in our bodies, and the Earth has a slightly negative electric charge. And so in theory, if we expose our skin directly to the Earth's surface, then there is a transfer of electrons, and that balances out the charge, and that theoretically makes us feel less stressed. I've yet to find any major scientific evidence as to whether this works, but a bunch of traditions from around the world outside of the West say that this is a core part of their traditions. And also I know a bunch of people who swear by grounding. And so it is something I do want to experiment with a little bit more myself. Oh, by the way, if you are enjoying this video, then you might like to check out Brilliant, who are the sponsor of today's video. Brilliant is a fantastic platform where you learn by doing, not just by consuming, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths and data analysis, programming, and AI. I've been using Brilliant for the last 5 years now and absolutely love it. They've got a wonderful first principles approach to learning that helps you build understanding from the ground up. And it's all crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from cool places like MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, Google, and much more. Brilliant helps build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not through memorizing things. So while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you're also becoming a better thinker along the way. And you can build this real knowledge in just a few minutes a day, which is the opposite of mindless scrolling. And their growing number of courses on programming are particularly good, and those can help you get familiar with languages like Python and start building programs from day one with their built-in drag and drop editor. If you are interested in trying everything Brilliant has to offer completely free for a full 30 days, head over to brilliant.org/AliAbdaal or scan this QR code that's on screen, or check out the link in the video description. And those links will also give you 20% off the annual premium subscription. So thank you, Brilliant, for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Action number 2, sunlight before socials. Okay, so if you've seen any of my videos about sleep, or if you listen to any of Andrew Huberman's stuff, you will know that getting sunlight exposure in the morning has a bunch of benefits. Firstly, it increases our cortisol levels first thing in the morning, and that helps us feel more awake. Secondly, it synchronizes our internal body clock or circadian rhythm with the environmental day-night cycle, and so the idea is that you then feel sleepy at the right time in the evening. But what's also really interesting is that the sunlight signal tells our brain to make serotonin, and so we feel happier and more energized for the rest of the day. And this is obviously a much better way to start your day than scrolling through social media, which a lot of us tend to do in the absence of something better to do.
An important note is that even if it's cloudy, you still get the benefit. You just need slightly longer out there. On a really sunny day, you'd need about 5 minutes. On a really cloudy day, you'd need about 15 minutes of morning sunlight in order to get the system started.
Action number 3, happy gut, happy brain. Okay, so action number 3 is all about then improving our gut health, because we know that this is where we make 90% of our serotonin. And as we've talked about, the gut has these strong connections to our brain through the gut-brain axis. Daily consumption of a probiotic supplement could have a positive effect in improving the mood, anxiety, and cognitive symptoms present in major depressive disorder. And this might be because probiotics are essentially trying to do the same thing as some branches of antidepressant medications, in that they are trying to increase our levels of serotonin. But rather than being drugs, probiotics are actually much more natural. They're basically foods or supplements that contain live microorganisms like bacteria and yeasts, and all of these can help promote a healthy balance of microorganisms in our gut. There are also probiotic foods, and these are things like kombucha and kimchi and sauerkraut, however you pronounce that, and tempeh, and even cheese and yogurt can be probiotic. But on top of probiotics, it's also important that we eat nutrient-dense foods with lots of fiber, because that helps our bodies make serotonin, and generally the healthier your diet, the better you're going to feel overall.
Biggest challenge we have in the modern world is we've got all these ultra processed foods entering our gut. Ultra processed food has become a massive topic now in the last few years. And as these foods enter our body's capacity to make serotonin is the least of its priority. The priority is then removing these toxic products from it, and then our serotonin levels dip. And so many of us are now struggling with the feeling of exhaustion and low mood, and that is heavily connected to the nutrients in the foods that we're eating.
Ultra processed foods are things like sweets and chocolate and cakes and all of the stuff that we find in bright, colorful packaging filled with a long list of ingredients. And there are two key questions that you can ask yourself to work out if something is going to help you make serotonin or not. Firstly, could this food have been on Earth before humans got here? And so these would be single ingredient whole foods like fruits and vegetables and beans, and even things that you can cook like rice and potatoes. And the second question is, do I recognize all of the ingredients? If the answer is yes, then probably the food is not that processed and is probably better for you. But if the answer is no, and there is a long list of ingredients that you can't pronounce, or you don't know what they are, or there's sort of these like all these chemicals and stuff, then chances are the food is more likely to be processed or even ultra processed, and probably isn't too good for your serotonin levels. This is an important point to emphasize. Back when I was working in medicine, we saw loads and loads of people with depression. We saw loads of people with major depressive disorder, and also with sort of like mild depression. And generally, most of these people didn't have healthy diets. It obviously is, correlation and causation and all that kind of stuff. But for most people watching this, like, your diet is probably under your control to a pretty large degree. And so you're just like leaving money on the table or leaving happiness points on the table by having a really shitty diet. So yeah, just saying. Action number 4, in for 4, out for 6.
What we see from a serotonin perspective is if the body is breathing very slowly, serotonin levels will rise because the body is getting into a calmer state.
Now, this is because slow, deep breathing activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which, as we talked about, is our relaxing-y type nervous system that puts us into a state of rest and digest. And to help with that, there is this technique called resonance breathing.
Effectively, with resonance breathing, trying to breathe just 6 times a minute. How you do that is you try and make your breathing round take 10 seconds. So then you only do 6 10-second chunks. In order to do that, you do 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out.
In fact, why don't we try this now? So if you are like me and you watch every video at 2x speed, it's now time to shift the speed setting back to 1 time speed, because we're going to do a little bit of guided breathing. So we are going to inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's do one more round. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get the idea. Even me, as I've been doing, I'm just like, I just feel a little bit better in myself from just breathing a little bit slowly. It's weird. Anyone can do this literally at any point, and it's just so easy to forget that we have so much control over our physiology based on how we choose to breathe. And it's just, this is why part of anger management, part of like energy management is, a lot of it is the breath. The breath connects to pretty much every aspect of our nervous system, or rather some of the key aspects of our nervous system. And so it's just, again, we've got free happiness points that are just there if we can do a little bit of funky stuff with our breathing. And then action 5, delta sleep. Okay, so this last action is all to do with our sleep, and the interesting thing about serotonin at night is that this chemical mostly switches off at nighttime, especially during deep sleep, which is also known as delta wave sleep. And this lets our serotonin receptors almost go through this kind of reset period, so the next day they're more sensitive to serotonin binding to them, and therefore the same amount of serotonin becomes more effective. This is probably why you might have noticed that if you don't get enough sleep, you feel kind of cranky in the morning. A big part of this is because your serotonin receptors haven't had that chance to reset, and getting enough of this deep sleep all starts with having a healthy wind down routine.
There's a lot of different sleep strategies out there in the world, but what I really want people to understand is your brain needs to go through a calming period before it then enters sleep. You don't want to be burning it out with social media as the final thing that you do.
So in an ideal world, we wouldn't be looking at our phone at all before we go to bed, and we would do something like resonance breathing or reading to enter this calming period, as TJ talks about. In my case, I read on my Kindle at nighttime, and generally the books that I read at nighttime these days are spirituality type books. I'm currently reading Living Untethered by Michael Singer, which is amazing. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, The Power of Now, The Untethered Soul, The Surrender Experiment, this is some good stuff. And it's so calming and it's so nice, and I love it. But if for whatever reason you are on your phone in the evening, then there's sensible things that you can do, like turn down the brightness and turn on like the night mode thing that makes the light yellow rather than blue. Make sure the screen isn't too close to your eyes. And in particular, watching high octane, high energy, high dopamine short form content is a terrible thing for your brain, because then it's sort of like going in all these frazzled circles. So if you do need to watch something, I don't think you need to watch anything before bed, but if you're telling yourself the story that, I need to watch stuff to relax before sleeping, try and make it long form content rather than short form content. On that note, it just generally amazes me how many people seem to convince themselves that they have to do unhealthy things in order to like survive. You know, oh, I have to watch 2 hours of Netflix to wind down in the evening. No, you don't. If you had something better to do, you wouldn't watch those 2 hours of Netflix. If you had like a really interesting social thing to do, or you were playing sports, you were doing something you genuinely enjoyed, you wouldn't have to, you know, use Netflix for those 2 hours. And if you found yourself on like a camping trip or something, you wouldn't have to watch Netflix for 2 hours to wind down. It's worth considering, and you know, I do this myself, so this is sort of notes to myself. It's worth us considering, what are the arbitrary rules that we've made up for ourselves? And are they serving us? If they're serving us, great. I'm all in favor of arbitrary rules that serve us. But if they're not serving us, then why are we doing it? Do you really need to watch Instagram Reels for 60 minutes to wind down? Probably not. So why bother making that rule for yourself? I don't know. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This playlist over here has the other 3 videos in our series about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. So check out that playlist if you haven't yet seen those videos, and I will see you hopefully in the next video. Bye-bye.